Welcome to Close Up, an in-depth look at the news that affects your life and the newsmakers. And now, Close Up host 13 WMAZ Special Projects producer Raymond Tubb.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us on Close Up. Well, if you haven't already done it, chances are that you're either doing it now or going to be doing it in the next few weeks. That's scrambling through forms, 1040 forms, maybe 1099s, 500s, Schedule A's, B's, C's, D's, a long litany, alphabet soup of tax forms. And if you're not doing it yourself, chances are you're paying someone to do it for you. What if you didn't have to do that? What if paying your income tax is as simple as mailing in a percentage of your income each month? Or what if you didn't even have an income tax? What if just whenever you bought something at the store, money was taken out of the sales tax, and that's all you had to do to pay your taxes? Well, today we're looking at alternatives to our current income tax system. We have joining us today Neil White with a group called CATS, that's Citizens for an Alternative Tax System. We also have Dick Bockert, who is a member of CATS as well. And we have Henry Olliner, who is a local business owner who is also involved in a lot of different tax groups and tax issues, and is going to talk to us about the impact of taxes on business, how that cost is often passed along to you. And we'll also discuss some of the other plans that are out there, the Dick Army plan, which is a flat tax, and some of the other flat tax proposals that we have available. First of all, though, Neil, tell us a little bit about CATS. It's a group that's been around for several years now. It's been growing statewide and nationally. You now have a full-time lobbyist up in Washington working for a national sales tax, which is what your group supports.
That's right, Ray. Actually, CATS was started in California in 1990 by several people who felt there must be a better way to see how we finance our government. And upon examination and doing a lot of research and checking with many economists, determined that, in their opinion, that this would be a very simple system. Everybody would be paying their fair share, and it would be a much improved tax system. It is a true grassroots operation. All the donations that or contributions to CATS is the only source of money they have. It's not financed as most of the AstroTurf groups out of Washington are. None of the people take a salary. It's strictly voluntary. So from that standpoint, it's really a grassroots operation. We have grown to about 450 chapters around the country, and in the last four years actually have been on 4,700 radio and TV programs promoting our system. So.
What kind of percentage sales tax are you talking about if we were to eliminate the income tax? How much would you have to pull in, or what kind of percentage tax?
Ray, to answer that question, first you have to say how much are they going to spend. But using the figures in 1990 income, what we did was ran the same economic studies based on what the government actually does to supposedly balance their budget. But by changing the system only, it would take between 16 and 18%, depending on what variations you did in the system to subsidize the poor and the elderly and so forth. So it's in that range anyway.
I understand Israel has a system like this in place.
That's correct. So does Hong Kong. The economy in Hong Kong is totally on a sales tax, and it's a very vibrant system. So that's one of the advantages, we think. Secondly, some of the advantages are that it collects money from the underground economy, and illegal aliens that are in the country, they pay when they do. So people share the cost of the government rather than being a specific at one area, one market area.
I guess to give an example, if a drug dealer who wouldn't pay taxes right now on the money that he's got coming in, but if he bought himself a Cadillac or a Mercedes or Rolls Royce, when he bought that car, he'd pay the sales tax and they'd go into the government treasury.
That's correct. In fact, if he were to be foolish enough to report his income and his occupation, which would go with it, then he'd go to jail. So he obviously would not do it under the present system. And the only way you will collect it is through the sales tax.
Now, a lot of people have problems with sales taxes in that they say they're regressive, that they hurt the poor, they hurt lower income people.
Was one of the reasons we dealt with that with a rebate type system that would set a level of where we considered poverty, whatever that were to be debated on in Congress, and at that point everybody would get a rebate of up to that amount of money as they spent it, say on a quarterly basis or some other system. Now, as far as the regressivity, our system would be proportional. The more money you had and made and spent, you would in fact pay more taxes. The fact of the matter is the income tax is the most regressive system that we have. Just look at where it is at the present moment. The poor who think they're not paying anything are really paying a large part in the retail prices because corporations do not pay any taxes. They only collect them and pass them along in the price of their goods and services.
Dick, talk a little bit about the, as far as the sales tax is concerned, or let's get a little bit more, I guess, into the history of the current tax system, because we didn't always have an income tax in this country. It's a fairly recent thing, and as far as withholding is concerned, I guess a lot of people have no idea how much tax they're paying. Even when they write the check at the end of the year, you've got the refund and complicated system there. That's even a relatively new tax device.
You're correct, Ray. For the first 125 years of this nation's history, we did not have an income tax or a direct tax on people, except for a brief period during the Civil War to pay for the cost of the war. And even Lincoln, who enacted that temporary measure, spoke out vehemently against his having to do so, and it was rescinded after the war debt had been paid. But we got the federal income tax, the 16th Amendment, ostensibly, and I say ostensibly because there's some evidence that Philander Knox, the then Secretary of State, and some others actually tinkered with the vote totals as they came in from the states, so the ratification process is still in question. A fellow named Bill Benson wrote a book on that called The Law That Never Was. That's a whole other subject. It's a whole other show. But in 1913, we got the federal income tax along with the Federal Reserve. And when the federal income tax began in 1913, the income tax rates were up to $20,000 was 1%, and then over $500,000 it rose to a huge number of 7%. Adjusting those numbers for inflation today, that first $20,000 becomes $250,000, and that $500,000 becomes close to $6 million. Imagine a $6 million income and a 7% tax rate. That's how the little monkey with the 16th Amendment became the huge 800-pound gorilla.
And it's grown quite a bit through the years.
And it can sit anywhere it wants to.
How did it get to be so big and continue to grow? It's not something that happened overnight.
Well, Neil touched on the spending component of this whole system we've erected, this federal system. And if the founders were to return today, they'd be either in jail or in the streets rioting. The system became, I think, out of control by virtue of a number of what have come to be called entitlements. We're fighting that battle right now. If you can suck enough people into a system where it seems like the free lunch and something for nothing attitude really does work, the perpetual motion machine, economic perpetual motion machine, and it doesn't. You can enfranchise and pull people into the system and get them to believe in it. We're watching the breakdown of that right now, and the CAT's effort is simply to deal with the tax side of this equation. There's a whole other issue that has to be dealt with, and I think Gingrich and some others are beginning to deal with, and that's the spending component. Because without the spending component under control, the tax thing, it doesn't matter what kind of a tax system we have. If we have an ignorant, uninformed, apathetic electorate, we could eliminate all taxes and cut spending by 50% tomorrow and be back in the soup Sunday morning again because the people have let it get out of control. We have neglected the affairs of our government. Pericles, 2,000 years ago, said that the person who fails to involve himself in civic enterprises or civic activities is not just harmless, he's useless. We've become a nation of useless people.
We're discussing alternatives to the current tax system, and that will continue in just a moment. Welcome back to Close Up. We're discussing alternatives to our current tax system, the income tax system on the national level. We have with us Neil White, who is with CATS, and that's Citizens for an Alternative Tax System. Also, we have Dick Bockert, who is with that organization, and Henry Oliner, who's a local businessman. He also has involvement in several different tax organizations, and can also give us some insight on what impact the current system has on a business. And Henry, I guess we can go on and get into that now. What kind of cost do you run into with the current system? Compliance with the IRS, filling out all these forms. You also have to keep up with the forms and the paperwork for your workers, for W-2s and that sort of thing.
The truth is, for most small businesses or medium-sized businesses, they can't keep up with it. They have to hire professionals to do it. They have large accounting staff, computers to do it, accountants. And I can probably estimate pretty close that we spend tens of thousands of dollars just on professional help just to comply with the taxes that are out there. And that's another component of the tax burden that we're not aware of. It's not just the 39% maximum tax and not even including the Social Security and Medicare, these other taxes that we all pay. But I think they've estimated there's an additional 25% cost of just complying with it.
It's over $600 billion annually.
Right. It's a huge expense that every business has to go that, again, does not go into the employee's profit sharing plan, does not go into capital reinvestment in their business, that is just sucked out of the business just for the privilege of paying the large tax bill that we already have to pay.
But it also goes into the cost of the goods and services that business produces.
Ultimately,
and the consumer pays it.
Ultimately, it goes into the cost of goods and services as well. One of the best examples, I think, that makes the point as clearly as anything I've seen was an article I was reading about some of the Chinese investors who were investing in the northwest part of the United States and southwest Canada around Vancouver. And it was a line that was frequently missed, but they were talking about middle-class Chinese investors coming there with $5 to $10 million. And this sounds so foreign to us that we can talk about middle-class people with $5 million to invest. We're talking about people who work in the markets in Hong Kong and how they have amassed millions of dollars, still considering themselves middle class, because they haven't had to pay into a confiscatory tax system that we have. And it's not just the income tax itself, which is in itself high enough, but at the same time that our income taxes are high, we also have the Social Security tax. It's 15% of our income total, whereas the people who designed that tax never dreamed that it would be over 1%. Or over 1% of the first $5,000 that you would make. We now have Medicare taxes that we're paying on it. And there is a whole other group of hidden taxes that are complying with these taxes. And this is not just the expense it takes to fill out and understand these forms that we have now, but this is to comply with what I consider to be an unelected fourth branch of government, the regulatory agencies, the EPA, OSHA, these other agencies that mandate that you spend money in a certain way, regardless of whether it's justified or not. Another way of taxing the citizens is to force them to spend money the way that you want them to, rather than take the money for them and spend it on those things that the government themselves would do.
Part of that cost for business and part of keeping up with things is the withholding system. Dick, we were talking a little bit about the history. Now, that was just a temporary measure to get us through World War II, right?
They needed to accelerate the inflow of income into the federal government during the war, the Second World War. And an economist by the name of Milton Friedman gave us this wonderful system. He has since apologized, calling it one of the darkest days in his history. As the income tax was during the war, the paying out the Civil War debt, the withholding we currently have today was to have been a temporary measure. Funny how these temporary things get to sort of be permanent. It's amazing.